India's support reminds us that true partnerships are built on respect and solidarity. Together, we are learning, growing, and creating systems in agriculture and technology that will give our children a stronger, self-reliant Burkina Faso.
What if I told you that the seeds of $1 billion transformation aren't being planted in global capitals or high-tech campuses, but in the fields and innovation labs of Burkina Faso? That at the center of this shift sits Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a leader whose drive for independence aligns perfectly with India's quiet commitment to African solidarity. This isn't a story of foreign domination. It's a story of partnership, sovereign ambition, and how one nation's vision to reclaim its future is meeting another's willingness to empower. Stay with me, because by the end of this journey, you'll see how agriculture, education, and tech are becoming the new frontier of African dignity. We begin in 2022, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré seized power in a Burkina Faso fractured by coups, terrorism, and economic dependency. The legacy of colonialism and foreign exploitation weighed heavily on the nation. Traoré inherited a state weakened by foreign troops, unequal trade relationships, and persistent food insecurity. Determined to reclaim sovereignty in all forms, he orchestrated a radical shift. French military bases were closed, foreign mining concessions were renegotiated under national terms, and Burkina Faso's foreign policy pivoted toward new partners who respected its agency. Enter India, a nation thousands of miles away, yet aligned in principle and praxis. Diplomatic ties date back to the 1960s, but under Traoré, they became intentional and strategic. India's early collaboration focused on agriculture, tractors, water pumps, improved seed varieties, and training for farmers in new techniques. These projects laid a foundation, but they were only incubators of what was to come. India's Team 9 initiative, launched in the early 2000s, extended to Burkina Faso development funding for rural electrification and agro-processing. A tomato paste plant created jobs and reduced farm waste in rural areas. But these were discrete interventions, not large-scale transformation. Everything changed when Traoré demanded more than handouts. He demanded equal collaboration. Soon after assuming office, Traoré reopened diplomatic channels with Indian officials. He requested inclusion in India's Pan-African e-network program to bring tele-education and telemedicine to Burkina Faso. Indian universities began offering virtual degrees to students in Ouagadougou. Medical consultations between Burkinabe doctors and Indian specialists became regular. Traoré praised the initiative publicly, highlighting that Burkina Faso was receiving knowledge, not charity. Under his leadership, vocational training centers were expanded, and new agreements were signed for co-managed solar irrigation projects, seed banks, and youth entrepreneurship labs. Traoré insisted that every project include local management and technology transfer. He toured rural innovation hubs powered by solar kiosks and seed cooperatives, meeting with farmers and young coders who were transforming their own communities using Indian tools. But Burkinabe ingenuity. In early 2023, a severe drought hit Burkina Faso's Sahel region. India responded quickly, sending solar irrigation kits and resilient rice seed varieties. Traoré credited the initiative on national broadcasts. "We don't beg for help, we receive solidarity." Beyond food, India deployed carpentry training, electrical workshops, and coding boot camps, all based in Burkinabe universities and co-managed by Traoré's education ministry. By mid-2024, new agreements expanded student exchanges, telehealth hubs, and agricultural incubators. Thousands of Burkinabe youth participated in coding hackathons, startup competitions, and remote learning sessions. Traoré's speeches reflected this shift. Our alliance with India is not foreign intrusion. It is equal collaboration, not charity, but choice. France and Western media began to take notice. They raised questions about India's influence. Analysts warned of Indian soft power gaining ground in Francophone Africa. But Traoré refused to retreat. He released national data showing increased grain yields, more startups, better graduation rates in STEM, and improved rural health access. These numbers spoke louder than suspicion. This grassroots impact, combined with clear intention and strategic leadership, positioned Burkina Faso under Traoré as a model for Pan-African transformation. I'll continue next with detailed stories from the ground. Farmers innovating with solar irrigation, coders building apps, women-led cooperatives exporting goods, and how these shaped the trajectory of a quiet diplomatic revolution. Let's now travel deep into the northern provinces of Burkina Faso, where vast lands once scorched by drought are now dotted with green patches, proof of a new dawn. This wasn't a miracle. It was a combination of two forces: a government willing to trust its people, and a foreign partner that understood the importance of dignity. One of the most remarkable transformations came from the town of Kaya. There, an Indian-backed solar irrigation project transformed over 1,000 hectares of arid land into a thriving grain belt. Farmers like Isaka, who had once lost entire seasons to climate unpredictability, now operate with solar-powered pumps, moisture sensors, and Indian-engineered mobile apps that track rainfall patterns and soil conditions. When interviewed, Isaka smiled and said, "Before, I waited for rain. Now, I control my season." President Traoré visited Kaya in early 2024, walking the fields with engineers and farmers alike. He didn't wear a suit. He wore traditional cloth, symbolizing unity with the people. Standing on a raised platform made from local timber, he declared, "This land is ours. These tools are shared. The harvest belongs to the people." The crowd erupted, not just out of loyalty, but because they felt the change. They saw their own hands at the center of it. Back in the capital, Indian IT specialists worked side by side with Burkina youth in a new government-funded tech hub, known locally as La Lumiere. It started with basic training, HTML, Python, database management, but under Traoré's encouragement, the hub pivoted into innovation. Local programmers, many from poor communities, developed an app called SugarTech that connected rural farmers with urban markets in real time. The app was coded by Burkina youth, tested with Indian tech mentors, and launched with government support. That was just the beginning. Telemedicine saw an equally powerful growth. A woman named Aminata, living in a remote village outside Gawa, suffered from chronic hypertension. In the past, her nearest hospital was over 80 kilometers away, but with India's Pan-African e-network, her local clinic was now connected to the Apollo Hospital in Chennai, India. Her diagnosis was confirmed by a live video consultation. Her medication adjusted, her life saved. President Traoré did not allow these efforts to remain quiet achievements. He made them national examples. During a televised town hall, he sat beside Aminata and said, "This is what cooperation looks like. A woman who would have been forgotten is now protected by our decisions, not dependent on them." The Indian ambassador to Burkina Faso praised the president's grassroots leadership and insisted that future collaboration must include local stakeholders at every level. Traoré responded by proposing the Burkina Faso India Agro-Tech Exchange Forum, an annual summit hosted alternately between Ouagadougou and New Delhi. The idea was simple: share breakthroughs, coordinate investments, and expand the reach of this collaboration to the entire West African region. By the end of 2024, over 120 Burkina students had received full scholarships to study agritech and engineering in Indian universities. In return, Indian trainers came to Burkina Faso to teach not only in English and French, but through interpreters fluent in local languages like Moor and Dioula, ensuring that no knowledge was lost in translation. Meanwhile, in the region of Bobo-Dioulasso, a new development took root, using a $10 million joint investment fund established by both nations. A technology village was created, half agricultural research center, half digital incubator. The goal: build hybrid solutions tailored for Africa. Things like drone-assisted crop surveillance using open-source software, low-cost seed preservation units, and solar-powered storage systems. Women took a central role in this evolution. Fatoumata, a mother of four and former street vendor, now leads a cooperative producing organic baby food from millet and sweet potatoes, with packaging machines imported from India and branding workshops funded through the India-Africa Development Partnership. Her business now supplies regional hospitals and NGOs. When asked how she did it, Fatoumata replied, "I didn't wait for help. I accepted the tools and used my own strength. Traoré often highlighted such stories in his national addresses. He positioned them not as exceptional cases, but as models. He once said, "We cannot all depend on mining or handouts. The future is in our ability to solve our own problems. And if India helps us do that without taking from us, then we are brothers in the same fight." Not everyone approved. Western think tanks began warning about India's strategic foothold in West Africa. France, once dominant in Burkina Faso, expressed subtle concern over the shifting alliances. But Traoré remained firm. Partnership does not mean replacement. It means respect. His foreign policy was simple. Whoever respected Burkina Faso's sovereignty, who didn't come with guns or debt traps, was welcome. India fit the bill. It didn't impose military conditions. It didn't extract minerals for peanuts. It didn't build infrastructure only to control it later. In one of his most viral interviews, Traoré was asked if India was becoming the new colonizer in Africa. He leaned forward and said, "When someone teaches your child to fish, they are not a colonizer. When they let you run your own river, they are not a colonizer. But when someone controls your fishing rod and sets your quota, that is colonization." And we have said no more of that. India responded in kind. Its prime minister praised Traoré's vision at a regional development summit, calling Burkina Faso a model of courage, resilience, and dignity. The story doesn't end with bilateral cooperation. Other African nations began to take notice. Mali, Niger, Chad, all countries navigating their own post-French independence, initiated talks to replicate the Burkina Faso-India model. Traoré welcomed this. He envisioned a West African bloc powered by solar agriculture, smart logistics, indigenous education, and non-exploitative partnerships. He spoke of a sovereign Silicon Valley, not in California, but in the heart of Africa. He painted a vision where farmers coded software, teachers used holographic tools, and students graduated with skills relevant not just for jobs, but for solving national crises. India's next step was symbolic but strategic. It proposed creating an Indo-African Agricultural Innovation Fund, starting with Burkina Faso as its pilot country. The fund aimed to support grassroots solutions, rural entrepreneurs, and sustainable startups across the Sahel. It wasn't debt, it was equity, local ownership, no strings. This was bigger than just bilateral trade. This was about creating a new economic language, one where sovereignty wasn't compromised for infrastructure, and where respect replaced dominance. As Traoré's administration strengthened ties with India, the people of Burkina Faso began to witness subtle yet transformative changes. In the north, where farming had been disrupted by insecurity, India-backed agricultural extension teams arrived quietly. These teams were not just handing out seeds, they were bringing new ways of planting, strategies for conserving water, and training young farmers on how to use simple but effective technology. Traoré personally visited some of these pilot farms. He didn't bring large entourages or cameras. He came quietly, walked through the rows of test crops, and listened to local farmers. For him, this wasn't just about international diplomacy. It was about giving his people back the dignity of feeding themselves. Soon, whispers spread across regions that Indian engineers had been seen working side by side with Burkina technicians to install solar-powered cold storage units, especially useful in remote areas where electricity was still a luxury. These storages were crucial for preserving tomatoes, fruits, and other perishables, allowing farmers to finally access better prices in urban markets, rather than being forced to sell at a loss during harvest gluts. At the heart of these operations was a joint Indo-Burkina task force that Traoré had insisted remain free of corruption. He handpicked members with a reputation for integrity and local understanding. This task force was responsible for evaluating local needs, overseeing implementation, and ensuring accountability. They weren't perfect, but their independence was unprecedented. In Bobo-Dioulasso, the second-largest city, one of the most ambitious parts of this partnership came alive, a vocational tech hub built in collaboration with Indian software experts. Here, hundreds of Burkinabés, many of whom had fled conflict zones or returned from risky migration attempts abroad, were given a second chance. They learned coding, data analysis, drone operations, and even rural tech applications. President Traoré visited the center quietly one evening, sitting in on a class about building simple AI solutions for agriculture. He smiled as a young woman demonstrated a mobile app she was designing to connect rural farmers to market buyers in the cities. Her prototype had been inspired by Indian agritech platforms. Traoré reportedly asked her, "Can this help my mother's village?" She nodded. He told her, "Then it's already a success." As the months passed, trade links between the two countries began to solidify. Traoré wasn't interested in dependency. He wanted reciprocal value. So, instead of simply importing Indian goods, he pushed for the export of Burkina products: sheep butter, cotton, mangoes, and even artisanal crafts. In return, India provided technical assistance, affordable farm tools, medical training kits, and open-source educational software. Critics, especially from Western-backed media outlets, began to speculate. They questioned the motives behind this alliance. Why was India so interested in Burkina Faso, a small, conflict-ridden nation often overlooked by global powers? Some claimed it was part of India's broader strategic push to counter Chinese influence in Africa. Others alleged that Traoré was simply hedging his bets, playing one global power against another. But people on the ground saw a different story. In the village of Dori, where children once walked miles for school, a new digital classroom had been built using prefabricated Indian structures. In Kaya, farmers proudly showed off their new irrigation techniques and solar pumps. In the capital, Ouagadougou, university students were participating in virtual exchange programs with Indian peers, sharing solutions to real problems. Traoré often said in private meetings, "We are not India's charity case. We are partners in rebuilding a future." His vision was not about becoming dependent on another foreign power. It was about using partnerships as tools to rearm the country, not just with weapons, but with knowledge, food, and dignity. But it wasn't all easy. There were sabotage attempts. Some rural projects were mysteriously delayed. A fire broke out in one of the new tech centers under construction. Traoré's intelligence network quietly traced it to factions unhappy with his pivot towards self-reliance. He didn't flinch. Instead, he gave a quiet order: build it again, this time stronger. Despite the mounting pressure both internally and externally, President Traoré pressed on. He began attending late-night strategy meetings with his closest team of advisors, engineers, security experts, and economists, not just military personnel. His vision had outgrown a simple resistance struggle. Now, he was building a nation. India, recognizing the rare sincerity and long-term vision of the Burkina leader, deepened its involvement. A $500 million line of soft credit was opened, specifically for infrastructure, agricultural mechanization, and educational development. But unlike other international loans that came with conditionalities hidden beneath complex documents, this partnership was transparent. Every dollar spent was audited jointly by Indian and Burkina teams and published in open reports for the people to see. This was a new kind of diplomacy grounded in dignity, visibility, and shared goals. Meanwhile, in a remote part of eastern Burkina Faso, Indian and Burkina scientists broke ground on something truly historic: a biogenetics and seed research facility. This lab was designed to develop indigenous, drought-resistant crops by merging traditional African farming knowledge with Indian innovations. Traoré personally named the center Sambala Institute, after a legendary Burkina warrior who defended the land not with swords, but with strategies. The construction of the Sambala Institute was a quiet revolution. Traoré ensured the staff included equal numbers of men and women, with young people from conflict-ravaged areas trained to work in support roles. He didn't just want an elite facility. He wanted a place where every Burkina could see themselves reflected. But as the partnership grew stronger, the threats became more complex. Western corporations, who had once monopolized Burkina Faso's main agriculture and telecom sectors, began to lose their grip. They no longer had the ear of the presidency. They no longer influenced how contracts were awarded. With India's open bidding system and Traoré's anti-corruption stats, backdoor deals were dying. One evening, just outside Ouagadougou, Traoré received intelligence that a group of foreign operatives were attempting to bribe key members of his cabinet to disrupt the India-Burkina Tech Corridor project, a plan to install fiber internet and mobile connectivity in the nation's most underserved areas. Traoré acted swiftly. Those involved were dismissed and publicly investigated. The message was clear. Burkina Faso was no longer a playground for geopolitical games. Across the Sahel, whispers about Burkina Faso began to change. No longer was it simply the nation that defied France. It was now the country building one of the most technologically inclusive societies in West Africa. Using knowledge diplomacy rather than bigging diplomacy, Traoré remained humble through it all. In a speech delivered to a small group of university graduates, he said, "Revolutions are not sustained by rifles. They are sustained by the capacity to feed, teach, and heal our people without needing permission." He refused to allow this revolution to be defined only by anti-colonialism. It had to be defined by results, visible, measurable progress that the people could feel. Meanwhile, Indian diplomats quietly worked with local chiefs and village elders to understand the real needs of communities. In a village near the Ghanaian border, one elder said during a listening session, "We don't need foreign flags. We need water, seeds, and schools." 2 months later, that village had all three, not through donations, but through micro-contracts and public work incentives, supported by the India-Burkina Agricultural Resilience Fund. The international media largely ignored these stories, preferring to focus on Traoré's military background or his confrontations with Western institutions. But within Africa, the story spread like wildfire. Other African nations, Niger, Mali, even Senegal, began sending envoys to learn from this partnership model. Could they replicate it? Could they also escape dependency? Traoré, for all his growing influence, remained deeply cautious. He often said behind closed doors, "Let us not run too fast and trip. Let us walk with balance, so we can carry our people with us." In the following months, a new initiative was unveiled, the Burkina Faso-India Food Technology Corridor. This corridor was a fusion of farms, storage depots, tech labs, and training centers stretching from the outskirts of Ouagadougou down through Bobo Dioulasso. It was the first of its kind in the Sahel. Youth who had previously taken up arms for various militant groups now laid irrigation pipes, monitored soil data, and managed app-based logistics systems. Traoré personally oversaw the recruitment of many of them, believing that a child with a tool and a purpose is harder to radicalize than a child with nothing but pain. But all of this came at a cost. Traoré's enemies grew bolder. In one incident, just as construction began on the corridor's central tech warehouse, a shipment of Indian processors meant for the facility was intercepted and destroyed on the border. The president responded with calm fury. Within days, additional security was deployed. Satellite surveillance was increased. India sent in technical security advisors, and Burkina Faso's local community watch groups were trained in intelligence gathering. What they built next was symbolic: a secure, open-source data server built right on Burkina soil to track every grain, every seed, every bite of progress, and all of it, every camera, every computer, every generator was run on solar energy. By the end of that year, what began as a modest diplomatic engagement between India and Burkina Faso had transformed into one of the most quietly revolutionary alliances in Africa. The West still didn't fully grasp what was unfolding. They saw Traoré as just another populist soldier in uniform. But on the ground, something much deeper was happening. A parallel system was rising independent of Western aid, World Bank loans, and IMF conditions. Traoré's presence at every key launch was not about politics. It was about trust. When the solar-powered processing plant in Ouagadougou finally opened, he didn't arrive with pomp and protocol. He wore a simple local tunic and walked through the dusty road to meet the farmers, who were now also data managers, technicians, and entrepreneurs. "You are the state," he told them. "The state is not in the capital. It's in the village that feeds the capital." That phrase was etched on the walls of the corridor's control center. For Traoré, symbolism mattered, but only when it came with substance. India continued to expand its footprint quietly. A satellite education program was launched where Indian professors taught STEM and agricultural technology to rural students via solar-powered digital classrooms. The slogan was simple: no village too small, no child too poor. Burkina Faso became a test case for India's soft power expansion, not through Bollywood or yoga, but through tech seeds and trust. Western intelligence agencies began to shift their strategy. They could no longer accuse Traoré of being reckless or anti-development. He was clearly building something that worked. So they resorted to old tactics: propaganda, funding oppositions, stirring ethnic divisions. Some Western-funded media outlets began publishing headlines suggesting that Traoré was becoming a dictator, that his partnership with India was a front for another form of colonization. But the people didn't buy it. They could see their roads being paved. They could attend health centers with Indian-supplied equipment. They could touch the fresh water from boreholes, drilled using solar rigs built in Pune and assembled in Fata Ngorma. Traoré's communication team, made up of young journalists and filmmakers, began documenting every project in local languages. Let no lie survive the truth, he told them. One major turning point came during a regional conference in Accra. Traoré, invited to speak last, stood before a mixed crowd of skeptical West African leaders and declared, "We have not come here to beg. We have come to show what is possible when a nation decides to be free not just politically, but technologically, agriculturally, and mentally." The room was stunned. Even leaders who previously viewed him as naive or dangerous began to ask quiet questions. How did he do it? The answer lay in a 3-page memo Traoré had circulated months earlier among his inner circle. It was titled The 5 Foundations of African Power. 1. Own your soil. 2. Control your seed. 3. Master your code. 4. Trust your youth. 5. Trade with dignity. This memo became the blueprint. It was translated into Hindi and circulated among India's diplomatic corps working in Africa. Indian Prime Ministerial envoys began quietly referring to Burkina Faso as our mirror in the Sahel. Back home, the momentum kept building. Traoré initiated a revolutionary digital ID program, not one designed by Western contractors, but co-built with Indian tech volunteers and local engineers. It linked every Burkinab to health, education, and land rights services, powered by blockchain and solar energy. It was simple, transparent, and nearly impossible to manipulate. This posed a new threat not just to imperialists, but to corrupt local elites who had long profited from opacity. For the first time, land theft became trackable. Ghost workers disappeared from government payrolls, and tax revenue, once swallowed by middlemen, began to flow directly into village schools and health posts. But the cost was high. Traoré faced 2 assassination attempts in under 6 months. Both were thwarted by loyal officers trained in Burkina Faso's new military academy, a joint project with Indian defense strategists. These weren't just soldiers. They were guardians of an idea. After the second attempt, Traoré gave an impromptu speech to a group of market women. He stood without bodyguards, wearing his old uniform, dusty and faded. "If they kill me, let them know they didn't kill a man. They killed a mirror." But the reflection already lives in every home, every village, every student who no longer has to beg for help to dream. The crowd wept, not with fear, but with fire. And so, the revolution deepened. The next 6 months became the most transformative in Burkina Faso's modern history. Following the failed assassination attempts, the people themselves became Traoré's greatest shield. Market women set up informal checkpoints at bus parks. Students volunteered for civic patrols. Village elders began nightly broadcasts on local radio stations, warning the population of foreign destabilization tactics. "Don't fear the ones who come with weapons," one elder said. "Fear the ones who come with gifts and empty promises." Traoré knew that revolutions are not sustained by speeches or slogans but by systems. So he doubled down. The partnership with India expanded to include a Pan-African initiative with support from the African Union and private Indian investors. A multi-country project called Sudro was born. Solar utility for decentralized rural Africa. Burkina Faso, Kenya, and Malawi were pilot countries. The aim was simple: provide uninterrupted solar power to every village within 5 years, not just for homes, but for agro-processing centers, hospitals, schools, and communication infrastructure. This was unprecedented. The IMF refused to support it, calling it unsustainable. The World Bank offered a diluted version filled with conditions. Traoré rejected both. Instead, He invited diaspora Africans, particularly those in India and Southeast Asia, to invest directly. Come home, he said, not to visit, to build. Young African entrepreneurs responded. From Lagos to Nairobi, from Dakar to Delhi, a movement was swelling. They called it Code Afrique. It wasn't just about tech. It was about rewriting the source code of African governance, education, finance, and identity. India, seeing the success, sent a delegation of educators, software engineers, and biofuel experts, not diplomat stewards. They fanned out across Burkina Faso, embedding in universities, farming collectives, and community banks. The model worked because it was not extractive. It was a partnership of shared pain and possibility. In Ouagadougou, a once forgotten neighborhood was transformed into the African Innovation Village. It had labs powered by cow dung biogas, classrooms made from recycled plastic, and a digital fabrication center where local artisans built drones from bamboo and 3D printed parts. President Traoré visited every week. Sometimes he swept the floors himself. Other times, he taught the Constitution to 12-year-olds in a makeshift amphitheater. It wasn't a photo op. It was a statement. The president is not above the people. He is among the people. The media outside still tried to distort the image. They labeled the movement as neo-nationalism. They said Traoré was isolating the country. But in reality, Burkina Faso's borders had never been more open to ideas, collaboration, and trade, just not to exploitation. One of the biggest shocks to the West came when Burkina Faso announced its withdrawal from the CFA franca, colonial currency controlled by the French treasury. This was seen as economic suicide, but India immediately stepped in to assist in building a digital stablecoin backed by agricultural reserves, gold, and solar credits. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Within a year, the new currency called Fasocoin was accepted in local markets, digital stores, and cross-border trade with Niger and Mali. QR codes replaced bulky cash. Every transaction was transparent. Corruption dropped sharply. Then came the education reform. Traoré invited linguists, historians, and engineers from Africa and India to rewrite the national curriculum. French was no longer the default language of instruction. More, Diwa, Fulfilled, and even Sanskrit and Swahili were introduced in schools. Children began learning about Sankara and Mandela alongside Tagore and Ambedkar. Western think tanks ridiculed it as a cultural experiment, but what they failed to see was that it was restoring dignity to a people who had been told for generations that greatness came only from outside. Inside Burkina Faso, there was resistance too. Elites who had benefited from the old system tried to sabotage projects. Some fled. Others tried to stage a coup. But by now the army was not just loyal, it was enlightened. They were taught not just combat, but philosophy, ethics, and economics. We fight not to conquer, one young officer said, but to protect the future. The final confrontation with imperial forces came quietly. A leaked memo from a European security firm revealed plans to destabilize Burkina Faso using proxy militias and digital sabotage. Instead of going into hiding, Traoré went live on national TV and read the memo word for word. "I am not your puppet," he declared, "and Burkina Faso is not your chessboard. We are awake now. You will not put us back to sleep." The people erupted. It wasn't just national pride, it was rebirth. Soon after, several African nations began sending delegations to learn from the Burkina Faso model. They didn't come for aid, they came for blueprints. One Tanzanian minister said, "We were taught that to rise, we must kneel before the West. But Burkina Faso taught us to stand, not with arrogance, with clarity." India's prime minister finally visited Ouagadougou, not with grand ceremonies, but to plant a neem tree alongside Traoré. "This tree," he said, "is bitter, but it heals, like the truth." As the sun set on that day, young boys played near the innovation hub, singing songs in a mix of Moor and Hindi. Old men sat under baobab trees sharing news from their blockchain-linked phones. Mothers sent fresh produce prices across regions with a single tap. Drones flew low carrying medical supplies to remote clinics. And President Ibrahim Traoré, he sat quietly on a wooden bench in a rural school, watching a girl solve a math problem using solar-powered tablets. He smiled not because the problem was solved, but because she knew she could solve it. That was the revolution. Before you scroll away, ask yourself this: what if every African nation had a leader like Ibrahim Traoré, one who puts people before power and progress before profit? Burkina Faso is showing us what's possible when we stop begging and start building. Don't just watch history, be part of it. Share this video if you believe Africa deserves better. Like, comment your thoughts below. And don't forget to subscribe to Pan-African Storyteller for more untold truths reshaping our continent. Africa is not rising, Africa is awakening. Will you rise with it?